next 2 days to exploring the well-being of our children and what that means to keep our kids in our own communities. My traditional name is Kandok. It was given to my parents on our wedding day for their firstborn daughter, and it means journeying over the mountain with belongings on my back. And I learned the meaning of my name when I graduated with my social work degree. And my social work degree certainly was that big long journey up the mountain.
The most precious resource are the children. And so I have a great interest in finding out how we can respond. And I guess as someone maybe who's looking in from the outside, I really hope that, the traditional ways of looking after children and child care and child welfare can sort of be talked about more in a more helpful way.
And I'm here today because social development is now under my umbrella, and I really want to be able to provide the support to the children and families. We see so many, as we've been sitting down in the last couple of weeks and trying to gain an understanding of how many of our kids are in care, how many of our kids have open files, and what are we doing, who's advocating on their behalf, and all of those things.
I recently just defended my PhD, which was a long journey, and I was very, very fortunate that I was able to defend it in my community in a feast hall. And my dissertation is called Haisla Nuya, learning Haisla Nuya through storytelling and lifestyle. So basically, it was just all the cultural teachings and stories about places around fishing and hunting, around how we help one another. And there were just stories that were told to me from my own life experiences from my mom and dad.
People telling their own stories about the teachings that they've got through community.
A lot of our stories is about, like what my relative was saying, is the importance of being a good person. My Auntie Doreen was, always never afraid to talk to me, and they actually looked after me in the longhouse as well when I was a new dancer. But I always remember being a little kid, I used to go fishing. I used to love to go fishing on the point. And I'd try walking by the house if it was around lunchtime or supper time. Toby, did you eat? Yeah, I'm okay. I called her Grandma back then. I think she was also small. And I'm okay, Grandma. Oh, baloney, get in here and eat. I couldn't go by without eating. Of course, with eating came stories and laughter and talking. But it's the importance, like when I talk to the university students and the professors, is the importance of our beliefs and our stories and our history, and how that would create a sense of well-being in our children and respect and honor.
As someone who studies development, we're really interested in these sorts of ideas and about how participating, like what children get from participating in community. And we've heard a lot of stories here today, personal experiences, stories, some stories from storytellers that speak to the sorts of lessons that children are getting.
I say it's so easy for us to teach our children about Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny, and it's culturally appropriate.
And I think when we talk about communities and communities caring for their children, these sorts of messages, these sorts of teachings through story, I think we need to have a place to get those out, and I think this gathering has been a good spot to begin those sorts of discussions.
Just that cross-cultural teaching, like what's acceptable and what's not. It's okay to believe in something that's, what is it, Euro-Christian? Is that the terminology? But ours is baloney. And I think of one really good example I share all the time. Growing up, we're taught that a piece of food falls off your plate, you don't touch it. And our teaching is because somebody on the other side is wishing for it. And if you take it and eat it, you're stealing from the dead, something bad's going to happen to you. scientifically we know something falls off your plate and you eat it, there's salmonella, E. coli, botulism, something bad's going to happen.
To get people speaking about what they've learned about through the cultural practices in their lives. So, for example, one of the storytellers in the session spoke about how we need to understand the lessons, and we need to know where those lessons come from. And I think that's been something that I've been thinking about a lot here today, and learning from participants is hearing about where those teachings came from and how they learned. You know, people interested in human development, I think hearing those community stories and those individual stories is really important.
Because I work a lot in helping people recover from violence of different forms. And so that's all about human interaction. And there are human beings, there are people involved in that. And so there's people who are being harmed, and there's people that are harming. And so I'm interested in looking at that level of social interaction. But if I'm working with a group of youth, and I just did one with some Métis youth, along with Kate Elliott, who's the provincial Métis youth representative. When we say structural violence, what we're talking about is things like racism, or your barriers to getting a job or to getting education, or being isolated or mistreated in some way because of who you are. Because you're Aboriginal, because you're Métis, because you're gay, whatever it is, if you are being kept out of the mainstream system and opportunities for some reason, then that's what we mean by structural violence.
I really know that toxic shame was passed on to our people in a really harsh way, and a lot of us became aware of it, and letting go of that shame and taking on pride that being First Nation was a big step, and I think it's a lifetime task to undo all that toxic shame.
People that are here today know that there's still a lot of discrimination within our people and within the schools, because I've seen that. I've seen that in my children, and I've seen it in my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren now.
Structural violence was very strong and powerful in our day, because most of the ones our age, we all went to residential school. In residential school, they taught us hate, violence, and all the abuses that happen. So if we do structural violence, we have to break that cycle. Start doing your healing.
More in line with my research interests, because I work in a counseling practice that's called response-based practice, I'm interested in what people actually already know and do, and what they already love and value and believe. And I do a lot of this work with Indigenous communities, and really it's about asking them, like we did this morning, about your cultural knowledge. What is it that you've done together to stay alive, to protect your children, to keep women safe, to protect the earth? What are your values, and how did you use all that knowledge? As peoples, we are really strong because we've been running uphill for a long, long time. And we've been running with broken hearts, we've been running under the influence of alcohol, we've been running seemingly feeling like we're all alone, and maybe someone will reach out a hand to help us. But the fact that we're all here, and you survived, and your parents and your grandparents, it shows.
For 3 years, I worked with the Tribal Health Authority to help facilitate circles. I'm learning a lot more about your particular community. I've known some of you for a number of years. I have worked in different capacities with some of you, and I continue to learn today in a more specific way of what it is of value and what it is of importance to you. What are some of the projects that are happening, whether we want to call it research or not. there's an end goal, which is finding out something that we want, whether it's about our youth, about our elders, about our women, about our children, about practices, about policy. And we will come to that end goal, making it very concrete, hopefully by tomorrow, trying to find out for ourselves what it is that we want to know.
I'm really proud. I'm proud of, being part of this community and being able to be part of creating space for us, especially around research, because, it's not very often that we can, as in a community, have academics or people come in to be part of the process rather than always coming in to do the research.
This quote that I have here comes from the document Indian Control of Indian Education from 1972, and that's the opening quote from that document that says, "Unless a child learns about the forces which shape him, the history of his people, their values and customs, their language, he will never really know himself or his potential as a human being." And this was a quote that was put together by all the national chiefs that in that time formed the National Indian Brotherhood, which is now the Assembly of First Nations. Marie Baptiste, who is an Aboriginal scholar, Mi'kmaq scholar, says that we have been marinated in Eurocentrism, that we just look at the world from a European, a Western perspective. And when we move out of those models, we feel not safe, we feel it's not right, we feel it's not valued, we feel that research that comes in different forms is not validated. And like Kathy was saying earlier, we need to justify why this is valid, why this is valuable, why people are the way they are. And it's a constant re-educating those in a mainstream point of view about why Aboriginal ways are as valued and go hand in hand with mainstream. In your toolkit, you have an article by a researcher by the name of Maggie Kovach. And Maggie, while she has developed Aboriginal methods for research, she also said that it's really important that we do know the Western framework and the Aboriginal framework. And if there's possibility to work with both, she encourages people to work with both. There might be some contexts where it's only pertinent to work with Indigenous principles, so we work with that. But if there's room to work with both, then we should work with both. And one example is, for example, funding. Sometimes we know that some funders like the proposals in a very particular way. So if we need to use that language, let's use it. But the funding goes to our communities. And Sean Wilson also talks about Indigenous methodologies, and one phrase that he has, or one idea, he calls it relational accountability. And with relational accountability, by that he means that as a researcher and as an individual, one has a responsibility to oneself, first and foremost, and also a responsibility to the community. There's different ways to talk about research. Marlene Brand Castellano, who also talks about Indigenous research, says that research, ideas, and goals come from our dreams. Research can also take that shape, where we take those visions and those dreams and explore them. She talks about traditional teachings, which we have covered today. She talks about research in a form of knowledge that has been passed on from one generation to the next. And so just as a reminder of how when we talk about other people, when we talk about ourselves, about our communities, those stories have a ripple effect. And once they are out there, they are out there. So we have to be really careful. I think for me it's a reminder of respect, of how to show those signs of dignity and living a dignified life, following the values, the teaching from our elders, and how that should take precedent, this notion of respect over anything that we do.
I'm here to learn about our culture and the teachings from my grandmother.
I think the battle for our kids has been a long, long way working towards trying to save some of our kids.
Mainly about our culture and the big house.
It's really important that youth are incorporated into the work, and I was quite surprised to see the size of the group, and I was really happy with their participation today.
It's like what we were saying right here, it's that like lacrosse is kind of like just cleansing. It's just really makes you feel good after a game. It gets tiring, but it's really a lot of fun to get into it.
And you also make like new friends in lacrosse too, friends that don't follow the path of your actual friends, like friends at parties. Like one thing that I'd say is just go for it and never give up. That's just the main thing. Like I tell the youth in the alternative program, is like I try and motivate them to like be better than me and do something that you can never think can happen. Just like trying to motivate them and going down the right path, because I was just the same way when I was a youth, but like life changes like that. Yeah. You just gotta like look where you want to go and just go for it.
Strengthening youth voices in the network is something that when I jumped on board with the network, I was looking for a place that I could put my energies towards, and that's an area of interest for me. And it's one of those questions of how does the community play a role in the lives of young people? Well, it just makes sense to ask you. If there's time in the next day and a half, if you guys are feeling like you want to bring that back to your community and show them here while we're here, that's an option. If not, we can figure out another way to do it.
You know, grandparents are the sort of anchor to all the children, the young children, to the great-grandchildren, to teach them how they're supposed to be. I'm really happy to see them here because it's kind of an education for them also.
I liked hearing Auntie Doreen's stories and getting some of the teachings out of there. Like even though she was talking about her family, there was teachings involved in that. And then seeing the young people that were involved actually actively participate instead of just sitting back and watching. It was really good to see them have a voice and be a part of something that's like kind of like seemed like it was ours. Right, the program kind of seemed like it was ours. It was really neat.
I think that it's really important that we continue to collaborate around child welfare issues.
I think it was a huge success because we had a good group of youth there and elders and lots of opportunity for dialogue. So I think it was a huge success the last couple of days.
The ministry often does their own research so that they could develop their own policies and their own practices for child welfare or child protection or the health and well-being of their children. And that's how they maintain their practices. So what we wanted to do is, as Indigenous people and as diverse, and all of us that work there are very diverse, wanted to come together, and we wanted to work with communities to conduct our own research within our different communities or different agencies, and conduct research and find out what practices would be relevant. Because of we heard in our introductions around the high percentage of kids in care, we heard about there's change in legislation and policies, but yet the practices still don't change. We still have a lot of our kids who are in care of the ministry.
It creates a space for us to have conversations around our children and child well-being, and I think that's important for any community to do, is to create that space for youth and elders to come together and start talking about our cultural teachings.
I think that in our work that everything we run into comes down to communication amongst agencies and between agencies and the community, and also just breaking the barriers that cause isolation for families.